Love your city, every back road, every alley, every pothole. Love your city, every back road. Come together, fight for your home.
Welcome to the Love Your City podcast. My name is Bob Dalton, and each episode I have the opportunity to interview people doing grassroots work in their communities. This episode, we're having a conversation with Stephen Young. He's the founder and executive director of Home Street Home, and he's the author of From Chains to Change. And we have a special guest, Lauren Akins, who's the podcast host and author of Live in Love, and the reason why we're pretty much all here. You connected us with Stephen, and I'm super grateful for that. I got to spend the other day with Stephen and get to see some of his work, but I want to hear from you how you guys got connected.
Oh, thank you for having us. This is so much fun.
Yes.
I feel like I'm getting to sit down and just hang out with two of like the most amazing rock star people that are just truly changing the world. So I just have to say that before we really get started. But I just adore you both. And so excited that I got to connect y'all. But I met Stephen actually through a friend, one of my very best friends. She was watching an award show on TV in Nashville. What year? It was 3 years ago?
2 years? Over 3 years ago.
4 years ago?
4 years ago now.
I bet it'll be 4 in November.
Yeah.
She was watching the CMAs, and after the CMAs aired, the local news station was just doing the news, and then an interview came on talking about what they were really trying to drive home is how cold the weather was about to get and how dangerous that was for our homeless community. And Stephen was on the news in April. My girlfriend was sitting in her bed watching and listening to the stories of these people living on the streets. And she had just taken her girls out or something that morning and talking about how cold it was, and then imagining these people on the streets at night with no coats and all the things. And she just broke down in her bed, and she was like crying, and she was like, looked at her husband and she said, we're going to do something about this. And so I think like the very next day she reached out, not expecting to hear a whole lot back. Just like, I'm sure they're flooded with people coming in, and I don't really know how much I can help, but I want to, and like instantly got connected, and they were like, we'd love to meet up with you. And so she called me and she's like, you're never going to believe this. I'm having a meeting with the founder. Like, we're going to dinner and they want to partner together. And she's like, I think we can really like do some cool work with this organization. And she was like, I just feel like this is something that lines up with your heart and your passion. Would you want to come to dinner and meet them with me? And I was like, 1000%, I'm in. Like, let's go. So we go meet up, we have dinner, and we sat down. And then when I slid in across from the table at Stephen, do you remember what you said to me?
I've slept since then.
You said, so we actually know each other and we're kind of family. That's what you said to me. Right. And I was like, what? So his family, through marriage, in my family, we are distantly related,
yes. I remember. Yeah.
And
my sister-in-law's side of the family.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we just
and not only that, the pastor of my church at the time.
That's right.
Was y'all's youth pastor.
Yes, was our youth. Yeah. In our
way
youth
back
group.
in the day.
Yeah. We made a lot of connections after we met
really,
up.
really did. It was amazing the people that were suddenly brought into that circle that we both knew.
Yeah, that circle got real big real quick.
And then from there, did you end up getting involved?
So we did. So April really and Kat Nell really are the women who spearheaded at least that first year. They were the ones that kind of, it was obviously April's heart, but then she kind of rallied these other women who she was like, I know that they've got a passion for this, and I know that they either have influence or resources or the drive to make something like this happen and be incredible. And so she literally started a group text and she said, hey, we met this guy named Stephen. His story is incredible. I will tell you a little bit about it briefly, but basically we're going to put on a fundraiser in like It was
couple of weeks.
It was so quick. And she was like, I'm calling everybody in Nashville who has connections, and I need y'all to do the same, and we're going to get this together. And I mean, every single woman on that group text, there's like, I don't know, 15 or so. Everyone was like, in. I'm in. Tell me what you need. I mean, we had auction items. We had a killer venue. We had food. We had drinks. We had an MC. We had country music artists coming in. And it was incredible.
Professional athletes.
It was I was telling Taylor Bob, and Talon.
Yeah, I was telling Bob yesterday about that first meeting when we had dinner, and one of the things that we brought up that we needed was our vehicles.
Yeah,
we were using our personal vehicles at the time, and so I was telling him how I was driving out to pick up the van, and that's when I got the call about the fundraiser. And April said hello and said, Lauren's on here with me, and we've got a few other people, and here's all these women now. Hey, Stephen, looking forward to meeting you. And I told him, I said I had to pull over to the side of the road. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, that's amazing. And do you feel like, because like the response of everybody and how excited everybody was, do you feel like everyone has been looking for an opportunity to do something? Like, why do you feel like this one particular situation, everyone kind of jumped on board and was like, we want to do something with you?
I think it's human nature to want to have a sense of purpose, to feel like your life was not created for nothing. And I also think that when you get to be a little bit older and you're not, in school and freshly married and doing the younger things, you're kind of like, man, did I lose my sense of purpose? My life doesn't look as, I don't know. I think I struggle with that some, but even younger, I struggle with just like, okay, Lord, like, why am I here? Like, what did you create me for? And I don't know that feeling ever goes away. I think if you're really in tune with yourself, you're always kind of pursuing or wanting that thing that you're like, okay, what was I created for? What was, even for such a time as this today or in 2 weeks or whatever it may be, like, what is my purpose in this moment? And for me, I want to still be relevant and maybe not even recognized by people publicly, but like just to know that my life is making an impact for good and that I am not a wasted soul on this planet while I'm here. And I think those women felt the same way. And then also just like getting to know Stephen and realizing that this is our community. Like, these are people we pass on the street every day in the car. Like, these are our people. And then I think we all felt that sense of like ownership and responsibility of like, if we don't help them, how can we expect anyone else to help them? And when you see their faces and hear their stories, all of a sudden they become your buddies. Or like Stephen, like we were such fast friends. I know he had a lot of connections too, but I mean, we instantly connected at dinner. And ever since then, every now and then we'll just talk on the phone, and it's so sweet and beautiful. And I know April and Kat and Taylor and the other girls are the same way. But I just think those women, they all have hearts of gold and want to help anyways. But when you see that tangible need and like, hey, we can make a difference, and the resources we have, the things that we've been given, we can use it for some serious good. And it was incredible to watch. It was so moving and such a cool night to be a part of. And then since then, we've done a few others, and we've kind of thrown around different ideas, and it's morphed into different things. But the most incredible thing is just the relationship that we've built, especially with Stephen. But even to the point of like, just, I know you get random phone calls and texts from all of us girls being like, hey, we just met someone. They're on this street. Their name is so-and-so. We told them that you're going to be reaching out. And so like now he's got all of these women all over the city connecting these people with Stephen. Like, hey, I've got a buddy. You need to meet our friend Stephen. And so it's turned into this like, Home Street Home is such a fitting name because it's turned into this little home and community in Nashville.
Part of it is too, and I've heard this from day one since I founded the ministry, there are a lot of people that want to help. They just don't know how.
Yeah.
The homeless part of our community is so much of an unknown to the general population.
Yeah.
They don't know how. They have a desire to.
We don't understand it.
Right. They have a desire to help. They want to help. They just don't know how. And I think this is what drove a lot of this too, was we gave them that ability to know how.
Well, Stephen's the connecting piece. You know, like I can't relate to the people on the street. I try to say something, it could be totally unhelpful.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Yeah, I think a lot of people live in that space where you're driving by people on the street, they're begging for something, you know, and you make mental note like, man, I want to do something. Like, you know that you want to help in some way. And you're having this conversation with yourself in your mind. And then by the time that you're done with this conversation, boom, you're at work and you kind of move on.
Yeah.
And so it's like we notice certain things of ways that we want to help, want to contribute, but then we kind of just move on very quickly. And there's not very practical ways for people to get plugged in that they're aware of that they want to do. And I'm like, I meet people all the time. I'm a huge believer that the majority of people want to do something, but they don't know where to start. And I think you're 100% right on that.
And they look at it and they go, you know, it's kind of like, I want to help, but what does that look like?
Yeah. And is it effective?
Right.
Like,
you want it to be impactful.
For sure. So when Stephen shared his story with you for the first time over dinner, was there something that you walked away from and said, and really thought like, man, that's something I'm going to remember? Like,
oh my gosh.
Like, what was the one, is there one thing
every time I see a person on the street, I go back to that night. Like, just hearing his story, his personal story, was so heartbreaking that the Lord redeemed into such hope and to obviously so much good. But like, hearing that personal side of it, and I think that you've said this too before, but I think sometimes, and I'm not proud of this, but I do think sometimes you see so many homeless people on the street and all of a sudden it's like they become like less of a person a little bit, more of a story, less of like, that's somebody's husband, that's somebody's son, that's somebody's sister.
Yeah, Princeton did a study where when we drive by people on the street, we actually process them as objects.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
It's heartbreaking. It's gut-wrenching to think that is a human soul that I'm just driving past. And I do think you have those moments where like, oh gosh, I do want to help. I do want to help. But I don't know. It's like, if you passed a 4-year-old standing on the side of the street, you'd look at that soul differently. Why does that one matter any more or less than the adult 40-something-year-old man or 60-something-year-old woman? And I think hearing his story brought so much personal, relational, emotional connection, and imagining myself in those shoes, or my dad in those shoes, or my brother. And it's a lot of like the organization that I work with, Love One. We take care of malnourished children in Uganda, and our oldest is from Uganda. And so I see these children in Uganda that we're helping to take care of, and I see my child's face. And it so easily could have been her that is in that need. In the same way with Home Street Home and the homeless community in Nashville, it's not totally impossible for one of my family members to end up on the streets. Yeah. And I would hope to God that somebody would look at my family member as a soul and have compassion and say, hey, I want to be in this with you. How can I help? Yeah. And you now, every time you say you see Stephen, you think of that, like homelessness different, or when you see homelessness, you think Stephen. Well, yeah, you see that person. On that note, let's dive into your story a little bit. Okay. You're doing amazing work here in Nashville, going into like tent cities and serving people, but take us back to, everyone has a reason why they got into the work that they're doing. Take us back to like your why, like why you're doing this type of work. Well, actually having become homeless at the age of 52 is part of it. But what I've learned over the years through therapy and everything else, the journey to
where I am today started back when I was a child. What I try to tell people when I speak publicly or just individually, nobody sat around at 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years of age and said, I want to grow up to be homeless. Something happened along the way. In my case, several somethings that eventually led me to the streets. But it was a lifestyle that was brought on by my childhood experiences. And it was a very self-destructive lifestyle that I led for decades. But again, brought on from childhood experiences and the home that I grew up in and the things that were done to me. And it eventually led me to a point of self-destruction that, to put it just bluntly, I was ready to take myself out of this world because I just didn't want to deal with it anymore. But it was ending up on the streets and that 5-year period and the things that happened to me, the things that were revealed to me, because I'd spent most of my life hating God. And early on in my book, I say, some people say they may say, I don't believe in God. I would say you're letting him off the hook because at that time I believed in him and I hated him. And that again goes back to experiences in my childhood. But it was during that 5-year period that I really understood that even though I thought decades ago that he had abandoned me, that he had turned his back on me, it was those 5 years on the streets where I spent an awful lot of time with just myself and my own thoughts, and that I realized a lot of people may have abandoned me through the years. The biggest person that abandoned me was myself. But I started to realize that God never did. And the entire time, all those years of self-destructive behavior and, for lack of a better term, anti-God living, he was always there. And I tell people now, I wouldn't want anybody to have to go through what I went through to have what I have now, especially my relationship with God. But I would go through it all over again, knowing I'm going to end up where I'm at today.
Yeah.
And so it was a series of bad choices and a lifestyle that eventually caught up with me. And I woke up one day and every bridge had been burned. I had family here in Nashville that knew I was on the streets and they couldn't tell you whether I was dead or alive because they didn't care. And that was as much my fault as anybody else's. But it wasn't what most people think puts people on the streets.
Yeah. And what do you feel like is what most people think puts people on the streets?
Well, they think, alcoholism, drug addicts, or they're just lazy. They don't want to work. And that's lack of education, which I try to do as much as I can, is to educate. But unfortunately, society has to be willing to accept that education.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard because if you start to delve deeper in and learn how homelessness starts for most people and what brought it about, then you can no longer get away with, well, they just want money for drugs, or they just want money for alcohol, or they're just lazy and they don't want to work.
Yeah. What are some of those top items that you feel like, what are the main causes from your perspective that actually causes homelessness?
Well, it's funny because we discussed this the other day when we were out in the field. And I remember when I told you this, I remember the look on your face when I told you. I said, the least cause of homelessness, less than 7%, are drugs and alcohol. The least cause.
Yeah.
Where most of society believes it's one of the major causes of. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think you were even more shocked is when I told you a lot of people that are homeless, that drink and do drugs, didn't drink or do drugs until after they became homeless. Mm. The drug abuse and the alcohol abuse within the homeless community, a lot of that is a result of being homeless, not the cause.
Yeah.
Because when you live that life, it's a life of misery, pretty much 24/7. You'll put on a good face. You'll learn to make the best of the situation. But in those moments, in the middle of the night, when it's just you and your thoughts, that's when the misery starts to bubble up. Mm-hmm. And you realize, this is my life. Mm. And nobody gets on the streets that they don't try to get off the streets at first. I did. But after running into so many brick walls and having so many doors slammed in my face, I was about to the point, and I call this the point of acceptance within the homeless community. And that's where they wake up one day and they go, I have done everything I can do, and I've gotten nowhere. I guess this is just my life. And from that point on, you start focusing on not getting off the streets, but on making the best of what you have.
Yeah, how to survive on the streets.
How to survive. And once they reach that point of acceptance, it's 100 times harder to get them turned around in the other direction.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I'm proud of with Home Street Home is we focus on those people. What a lot of other people that do what we do will call the hard cases, the ones that they've already given up on them. Yeah. And I knew what it felt like to be given up on, and to have given up on myself. And I was fortunate that God put one person in my life that he wasn't going to give up. He wasn't going to give up. And I gave him 100 reasons why he should. I tried to drive him away, leave me alone. But he wouldn't give up. And that taught me a valuable lesson that I needed to learn once I was convinced to start Home Street Home, which I fought that tooth and nail in the beginning, because I'm sitting there going, I got off the streets in March of 2014, and here it is 3 or 4 months later, and these people are telling me I need to start doing something for the homeless community. And I'm going, I just got off those streets. Why do I want to go back? Mm-hmm. But I lost that argument with God. I still argue with him, and I still lose. But that's okay. I love the fact that he gives me the ability to argue with him. But Mike Dotson, he just wouldn't give up. And the valuable lesson that he taught me was this. They may not be ready today. They may not want to tomorrow. But the day is going to come. And what has happened is the persistence is not there for those of us that are now on this side of it. That's the lesson Mike taught me. He was persistent. He wasn't pushy. Mm-hmm. And he expected nothing, which was the great thing. Mike met me one morning. He pulled up And he said, I don't know if you've had breakfast, but I've got you a sausage and biscuit. And he handed it to me. I said, thank you. And I turned my back on him.
And you were on the streets. Were you in a homeless camp?
No, I was standing on the corner where I sold the Contributor, which is the homeless paper here in Nashville.
Okay.
It was my little corner. I stood there for 5 years almost. And it was right there at a McDonald's. And he saw me, bought a sausage and biscuit, came over and handed it to me. And literally I took it, said thank you, and I turned around and totally ignored him. That was pretty much that first visit. He came back. And he came back. And he came back. The amazing thing about Mike was he never had expectations. None. And he invested, I imagine the 2+ years that before I got off the streets, and he's the one that got me off the streets. And I totally messed that up the first time around. My old self kicked back in. But what he invested wasn't money. And he'd tell you just like I would in the two and a half years prior to me getting off the streets that he knew me. I bet Mike didn't spend $1,000 on me. He invested what every homeless person walking the streets, no matter where they're at, needs the most. He invested his time and himself. He would just show up sometimes and he'd have a pizza and he'd sit right there on the curb and have lunch with me. Sometimes he'd take me to lunch. Sometimes he'd just pull up and go, I'm on my way to an appointment, but I want you to know I was thinking about you. Hope you're having a great day. I'll be back and we'll talk soon. And he kept coming back. Mike was a deacon, very Christian man. Pay attention, Christians. He invited me to church one time, and never brought it back up again. And almost a year later, without him even knowing, I walked through that church door. And I tell people today, the reason I walked through that church door is because he didn't, after inviting me and me not showing up, and another week go by and I not show up, and another week go by and I not show up, he didn't go, well, I'm done with him. I'm going to go find somebody else. That's the reason I walked back through that church door, is because I knew then he had proven to me that his care for me, his interest in me, his compassion for me had no expectations.
Yeah.
There were no precursors. There was no expecting me to do or behave a certain way. It was true. It was pure. It was honest. And I had, at 50-something years of age, I had never been treated that way by another human being, ever. And for my entire time on the streets, nobody even ever came close to treating me that way. And he's still with me today. He's the chaplain of our ministry. We talk on a daily basis just about. And it's funny, he mentioned not too long ago, he says, our roles have kind of reversed. He said, you would call me, hey, this is what's going on. What do I do? And he says, now I'm calling you going, this is going on. What do I do? Yeah. So it's kind of leveled out, a little bit. But that's it.
What a gift.
Expectations are the number one reason our friends fail in regaining their life. Because, no offense, churches, love my God, love my church, love all churches. We as Christians do a couple of things that hinder us being able to really make a difference, have a huge impact. The first thing we do is we tie what we do for them and how long we're willing to do it for them. We tie what they do in return. And it's like, okay, we're going to do this but here's what you got to do.
Yeah, there's some strings attached.
Always strings attached.
Yeah.
That's number one. And it doesn't work, by the way. It does not work. The second thing is, and this is broader than just churches, but I focus in on my Christian brothers and sisters because we really should know better. We judge on what we see, not on what we know. Oh, well, I drive by him every day and he's drunk, so he's just a drunk. Did you ever stop and ask him why?
Yeah.
Because I tell you, there's a story there. But that takes us out of our comfort zone. But what it also does is it takes away one of our reasons or defenses, or as I like to call, excuses for not doing anything.
Yeah.
Because if we do stop and we do find out why, then that makes it very personal, and we can no longer just drive by and do nothing.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh my gosh, you know.
Yeah. Well, his investment into you has made such a major impact on your life that you're now doing similar work with others. So I think it's a good opportunity for you to share what you do with Home Street Home and similar type of work of how you go into homeless camps and you build relationships with no strings attached.
Well, and that's the key. The key is relationship. And from day one, we've never called them clients. We don't use, we call them our friends. We don't have any other label for them. Because here's what I know. I'm off the streets today for two reasons. One, always and always will be, is God. But the second one is Mike. Mm-hmm. Because he built that relationship. Nobody gets off the streets, and let me paraphrase this with for good. Nobody gets off the streets for good unless their relationship has been built. But that relationship takes time.
Yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with people who have so many walls built up, so many defenses, that you have to literally, and you've heard this phrase over and over again, you literally have to peel that onion slowly. Nobody wants to put that kind of time and energy in, and again, invest themselves in that process. We've gotten in, we're fixing to go into our 9th year now. We've gotten over 600 people off the streets. Now, that pales into comparison to a lot of other organizations. They'll do that in a year or close to it. But here's the thing. Of the 600 plus we've gotten off the streets, there's only 11 that went back on the streets.
Wow.
So powerful.
Whereas if you do it the way it's always been done, a year after, if you took 100 people, a year after, maybe 30% are still off the streets. The rest have gone back.
Wow.
Because you've never built that relationship, and you've never addressed how they ended up on the streets in the first place.
Yeah.
I like to say you can put a roof over their head and a bed under their butt, but you ain't solved anything. But that's what happens, because nobody takes the time to understand the complexity of being homeless. And some people will go, well, how complex is it? And I believe we talked about this the other day. You have to understand that when you're homeless, every sense that you have, hearing, sight, smell, even taste, is being stimulated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You're out there, you're hearing the sounds of the birds, the wind, the cars, constant stimulation. And there are very few lone wolves within the homeless community. So you not only have constant stimulation of all your senses, you have constant companionship, pretty much 24/7. taking somebody out of that environment and putting them into an environment that they're up 90% of the time or 95% of the time, they're by themselves, enclosed in, it could be a nice apartment. But all of a sudden, now at first it's great because they're getting all the attention. The caseworkers are coming by, they're getting phone calls, they're getting checked on. But that starts to wane because we got to get on to the next person.
Yeah.
It becomes a numbers game.
Yeah.
We've got to get another person into housing. I can't tell you how many, well over 100 I know, that have walked away from their apartments to go visit their friends. And another thing is when you've been homeless for especially a length of time, you don't know how to make new friends. You're not comfortable in that world.
Yeah,
yet.
your friends were the people in the camps.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's a whole different lifestyle. So you're alienated.
Community.
And you usually don't have the finances to do much in that situation. So you get lonely. So where are you going to go? I got to get out of here. These walls are closing in. I got to get out of here. You're going to go to where you know, to who you know. I've seen it over and over again. They never go back. They don't even go back and get their clothes. They stay right there and start from scratch all over again with just the clothes on their back because they had gotten so lonely.
Yeah. Well, with Home Street Home, share real quick about just the practicalities. You guys are going 6-7 days a week, delivering resources to different homeless encampments on the outskirts of Nashville. That a lot of organizations aren't necessarily going to or servicing.
Right.
Share a little bit about just the practicalities of some of the things that you guys do.
Well, I learned two things while I was on the streets. I learned what was being done, but more importantly, I learned what wasn't being done, and I decided we've got to do what wasn't being done. If you drop a pin in the center of downtown Nashville, you go out 4 or 5 miles, you're only going to account for about 20% of the homeless population of Nashville. But those 20% are getting 95% of the assistance because all the assistance is located downtown. I was 13, 14 miles out of town. I was still in Nashville. I stood on the same corner for almost 5 years. I never saw one outreach worker from one organization, nobody from the city.
Wow.
And when I started Home Street Home, I went to some of these people in power and in leadership. And I said, this was the situation. How come I never saw anybody? And they go, that was a little far out for us.
Ooh.
So from day one, I said, we're going to, I like to say, we're going to make house calls. We're going to go to them. They don't have to come to us. And that's another thing about what's going on. You can get fed every day in Nashville, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. You can get a shower every day. You can get your laundry done every day if you're downtown. You got to get to it. Well, if you're homeless with very little money or if any money in your pocket and you're 14 miles out of downtown Nashville, that's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
So what we set up to do was we're going to go where they are and we're going to provide whatever it is they need. And I get asked all the time, well, what is it exactly that you do? And my favorite response to that is we try not to say no. We've done everything from getting eyeglasses, dental work, to putting them on buses, sending them back home to family.
Yeah. Well, we were there the other day and he's like, yo, Steven, I need a propane tank.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just whatever
You're
they
like,
need.
I got you, brother.
And that's another thing that I found interesting is what we do. And thank God for April and Lauren and Kat, I could list the names. Thank God for them because we struggle to stay funded because what we do isn't sexy. Okay. Now, put somebody in a house, put somebody in a home.
Yeah.
Oh man, they're like, this is great. Here's your check. How much do you need?
That's what people want to see.
Yeah, that's what they want to see.
That's what they think they want to see.
And I made a post one time. I have found notes on my truck. One was, I posted the note one time, it was on a napkin. And I'm kind of paraphrasing, but it was, if you would quit taking care of them and enabling them, basically, maybe they'd get off their lazy and get a job. I've had people actually accuse me of making the homeless situation and what we do, making the homeless situation in Nashville worse. Mm-hmm. You know, so there's not a lot of people that want to get behind what we do, but they only see it as enabling. What they don't see is what we are actually doing. Mm-hmm. And I'll own up to the enabling part. Yes, I'm enabling them to stay alive until that day, like we talked earlier, that day that they wake up and go, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm ready to do something else.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you deliver resources there, you provide what they need, you try not to say no. That's a big part of your guys' work as an organization. But I think that I love attaching a story to the practical work inside of things, because I think it gives a really clear depiction of what you do. Share the story of Damn It, Donnie, because it's one of my favorite stories. Have you heard this yet?
Yeah.
And it's so good, man. I think it really showcases how committed you are and the culture that you've really dedicated yourself to.
We call him Damn It Donnie because every time we went to his camp, he would always do something where I'd have to turn around and go, damn it, Donnie. So it just kind of stuck with him. And Donnie was difficult, to say the least. Donnie was full of himself at times. Donnie was a pain in the ass. And Donnie and I, we had several confrontations, because again, I think you all witnessed that the other day. I hold their feet to the fire. I don't let them get away with any shenanigans. But Donnie was just difficult, and but I dealt with him, and so a time came where I couldn't find Donnie. I'm going, shit, what's going on? So I finally asked somebody. I said, "Where's Donnie?" Well, you didn't hear? I said, and when they said that, I thought, oh my gosh, he's either dead or in jail. And, which is the first two things that always run through my mind when somebody has disappeared. And I said, no, what? He went into rehab because Donnie was a drunk. And I said, court ordered? Because I could never see Donnie going any other way. And they said, no, he checked himself in. Excuse me. And I said, wow. So I just, started praying for Donnie. And when I was talking to God, I left the damn it part out. But he, one day I get a call. It's several weeks later. And I answered, I said, hello, can I help you? And he said, you know who this is? I said, yeah. He said, well, did you hear I went into rehab? And I said, yeah, I heard. Congratulations. I'm proud of you. I said, what's up? Oh, never mind. Never, you're not going to help me anyway. I said, what do you need, Donnie? I said, Donnie, what do you need? And he said, well, if I'm calling you, everybody else has already turned me down. So I'm desperate. I said, yeah, Donnie, what do you need? And he goes, well, if I'm going to stay sober, I can't stay in Nashville. And I wish you could have seen the smile on my face when he said that, because I realized this was no longer, damn it, Donnie. This was the Donnie that I see in every one of our friends. It exists, whether you believe it or not. He's no longer the homeless, damn it, Donnie. This is the Donnie he was born as. This is the Donnie who, as a youngster, as a child, as a teenager, had dreams and hopes and wishes. And I could hear it in his voice because he made that decision. And I said, well, what do you want to do? He said, I want to go back home. But never mind, I know you're not going to help. And he just kept on and on. I said, Donnie, stop. I said, do they know you want to come back home? Yes. I said, are they okay with that? He said, yes. He said, but I don't, just never mind. I said, Of course, when he first told me, and I knew where home was, when he first told me he was wanting to go back home, fortunately, I was sitting at home in my office when he called, so I was on my computer. And I'd done pulled Greyhound up. I'd done found out when the next bus was to East Tennessee. And so I finally stopped and I said, let me ask you something. I said, can you meet me at the Greyhound station at 2:00, or do I need to come and pick you up? Why? I said, well, while you're running your mouth and telling me how I ain't going to do anything, I've already found the bus schedule, and I need to have you there at 2:00. I said, now, if you can get there, meet me there. If you can't, I'll come and get you. I'll meet you there. But are you really going to show up? And I go, yeah. But moving on with the story, I pull up, and he's sitting there on the curb, and he stands up, and he's just shaking his head. And I get out of the truck, and he said, you actually came. I said, Donnie, I said, the time you threatened me with a baseball bat, 2 minutes later we were hugging it out. Every time you've called, I've always come. I've told you I always would. I said, I'm just not going to put up with your shenanigans. And so I said, now let's go in and get your ticket. So went in, got his ticket. He came back out, and I looked at him. I said, now, here's the deal. I don't want to ever see you again, unless you're coming to Nashville on vacation and you want to take me to dinner. And I gave him a couple of $100 because I didn't want him to go home empty-handed, broke. And we had a little more conversation. And he said, well, he started tearing up. And when he said this, he said, you're the easiest man in the world to hate and the hardest man in the world to love. He said, but I love you. And the tears just started flowing. And he turned around and started walking off. And I'm just standing there. And he gets maybe 5-10 feet. He turns around, he looks at me, he says, but if I ever see you again, I'm going to kill you. and I said, that's what I needed to hear right there, is because, and I did, because I knew he's okay. I talk to Donnie almost every week now. And that was 4 years ago. He's doing great. Got his own place, engaged to be married, got a good job. But Donnie had been on the streets 14 years.
Wow.
And the only other one that tops that is Wayne. Wayne had been on the street 33 years. And the first time I met him, I'll have to take out all the F-bombs, but I was basically told to get the heck away. He didn't need anything. He didn't want anything. Leave him the heck alone. That was our first conversation. That was our second conversation. That was our third conversation. But I go back to what I said about Mike. This is why I am persistent.
Yeah.
I learned that lesson early on. Everybody else had given up on Wayne, but nobody wanted to find out how Wayne ended up where Wayne ended up. And it took me several months to get the story out. And again, anybody ever saw of Wayne is he was a drunk. Well, Wayne was from a little town in Alabama. He was married, love of his life. She got pregnant, had twins. 6 months later, twin girls. 6 months later, he gets served with divorce papers. She takes the kids, leaves him. That's when he started drinking. He lost his baby girls. He lost the love of his life.
Yeah.
He became the town drunk, basically. Small town in Alabama. And one day, he's staggering down the sidewalk, and around the corner comes his ex-wife with his 2 daughters. And he said the look on their faces is what caused me to leave town. Not quit drinking, leave town. He was harder than Donnie to get moving forward because he didn't trust anybody.
Yeah.
And finally got Wayne into an apartment. He's still there right here in Nashville, 2.5, 3 years later, doing great. But one of the greatest moments of what I do is he calls me one day, whenever I'd stop to check on Wayne, it was funny. I'd knock on his door and he'd walk up and he'd open the door and wouldn't say hello or nothing. He'd just swing the door open, turn around, walk back into his apartment. So I just walk in and close. I mean, he was that way. But he calls me up one day and he says, "Can you come by the apartment?" I said, "Yeah, do I need to come now? Is everything all right?" He says, "No, everything's fine. Just whenever you can, come by the apartment." I said, "You're not going to give me a hint?" He says, "Just come by the apartment." I left all the other words out. And I said, okay. So later that afternoon, I show up. I knock on the door. Sure enough, he swings the door open, turns around, walks off. And he walks into the kitchen. And I walk around and I go, "What's up?" And he reaches over. I see him grab something off the kitchen counter. And he walks over to me and he says, "Here." And he's handing me a key. And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "It's a key to the apartment." I said, "I don't need a key to your apartment." He says, "Yes, you do." I said, "Why?" "You're the only one I trust." The only one I trust. That was amazing, but it also was a realization of my role and what God had called me to do. And I even, at that point, took what we are as an organization and who we are as an organization even more serious. Mm-hmm. And that was my life over these 8 years has been changed in so many amazing ways that I could have never dreamed of. And me as a person, me as a man, me as a husband, me as a brother, a grandfather, a father, I could have never seen me being this person. And I'm not all that in a bag of chips, but it was just something that I never took serious. For most of my life, it was just to hell with everybody, including God. Mm-hmm. And I never took we all have a responsibility as human beings. And that responsibility isn't necessarily to any particular thing. We have a responsibility to God and to our brothers and sisters who occupy this world with us to be the best person we can be. That's not something that we should ever take for granted. That is our responsibility. Mm-hmm. We have a world, not just the homeless world. We have a world that is hurting mm-hmm. in so many ways. And whose job is it? It's not the politicians. It's not the government. It's not the church building. It's the original church that was created, which is those of us that are sitting in this room right now. Mm-hmm. Those of us that practice our Christian beliefs. We have a heavy responsibility, and it can be overwhelming if you look at it that way. But what I've learned over time is what I thought from the beginning of Home Street Home, and pretty much for the first several years, was a heavy responsibility, is really an incredible blessing. Mm-hmm. And once you realize that if you accept that heavy responsibility, something that only God can do will happen. Yeah. And that heavy responsibility will suddenly become amazing blessing after blessing after blessing. Yeah. I get to go out and do what I do every day. Mm-hmm. And I never look at me or our organization as a blessing to them. They are a blessing to us, and to me especially, personally.
Yeah. Man, well, thank you for sharing that. It's really powerful to see how integrated that you've been in people's lives. You've gotten to not only have somebody come into your life and walk with you through that season in your life, but you've gotten to step into other people's lives and walk with them through their situations and help them move on to the next season in their life. And it really speaks volumes of how dedicated and committed you are to your particular work. And I deeply share in the philosophy that we all have a responsibility, not just Christians and believers or whatever, but like I believe every single person has a responsibility to care for people in their life and in their community and be the best person that they can be. And it's a big thing that's driving my work personally. Like I really believe that we got to stop blaming the government and the church and all these things that we can say, like we can always point the finger and say, this is why something's not getting done. But at the end of the day, the way that things are going to really get done is if we take responsibility for our communities. I actually just got this tattoo, kuleana. It's a Hawaiian word, which means responsibility. And when I was in Hawaii, they were saying at a luau, like, kuleana is responsibility, us caring for one another. And when we were on this island for years and years and years, we survived on an island because we cared for one another. We all took on a certain role and responsibility to, you're fishing, you're building, we all had a responsibility. That's how we survived on this island for years and years and years. And I feel like one of the biggest things that I want to continue to push forward is that we all have that responsibility to care for one another. We all have a specific role to play, and we got to stop pointing the finger and blaming everybody else for the problems of society. And it's time to start stepping up and doing something about it, which is why I'm really thankful to have you share your story and about your work. When it comes to Nashville specifically, the city of Nashville, you have all these homeless encampments,
right?
Where that is your field work. That's where you're going to build these relationships that you're describing.
Right.
What do you see as the future of Nashville when it comes to how the city is approaching it and how that's going to essentially affect these homeless encampments in which you go and spend your time?
Well, it's not getting better. It's getting uglier. We've had more encampments shut down this year than the last 3 years combined. It's kind of like, and I get asked all the time, well, what do they expect them to do? And, I don't have a whole lot of friends in City Hall because I speak what I've known for 5 years living it and 8 years doing it. They don't care. They'll tell you they do. They'll pay lip service to it. They'll come up with programs, but they're not getting to they're not getting to where they need to get to really have an impact, a lasting impact on the situation. You can't take a program or a train of thought that isn't working and sit there and go, well, it's still a good idea. We just maybe need to tweak it and do this and do that. No, you need to come up with a completely different idea. And I've always said, you go in, you're just not too long ago, out close to where I live in Hermitage, they went in, it was home to probably at that time, 15, 16 people. At one time, it was 25 or 30. And they literally went in there and they gave them a notice, y'all got to get out of here. The next thing you know, the bulldozers pulled in, they leveled everything, they scooped everything out. They went in and spread sawdust out through all of it because it was just nothing but dirt. And they put a fence up around it. Same thing they did under one of our local bridges here in Nashville, downtown Nashville, that had a homeless encampment. And they got them all, cleared them all out, built a fence around it. That's what they're doing now.
Well, is there an appropriate way to approach encampments that it doesn't have to be so extreme, or it doesn't have to be, can it be done in a dignifying way?
It can be done, and other cities have done it. I always like to use Denver as an example. Denver had a sanctioned camp. What they did was they went in and they built a homeless camp, and there were tents. Now they weren't cheap tents because they would survive the Denver winters.
Right.
They built them on a platform. Nice. They were in a nice, neat row. There was a road through there. They had several different rows of them. They had shower facilities, restroom facilities, city services, social services. What people don't understand is what we talked about earlier. You can't take them from here It's kind of like you can't go from 0 miles an hour to 100 miles an hour safely. Mm-hmm. And they want to take them from totally nothing to you now have a home. Mm-hmm. You know, I hate it when they sit there and go, housing cures homelessness. No, it does not. There's a reason it's called homeless, which they've done away with that now. Now they call them unhoused. This thought process that putting somebody in a home or a house is going to take care of it is the reason it continues to fail. It's a process. It's like anything else. We've all raised children, okay? You don't sit there and you show them one time how to tie a shoe and then they're supposed to know how to tie that shoe, you know. So what I've always suggested from day one is give us a sanctioned camp, a city-sanctioned camp. There's a little town not far from here, McMinnville. Not very big at all. That's what they've done. They've gotten everybody on board, the churches, the sheriff's department, the city officials, the county officials, and they're building a sanctioned camp. Because here's what you do. You take them out of the rough aspect of tent life into a nicer aspect of tent life. Mm-hmm. It's a step up.
And it stays community driven and there's resources that are able to come in.
And so that's step one. It's kind of like learn to crawl, learn to walk, learn to run. Then from there, you start working on the more serious aspects of what they need, because now you've got them stable. Mm-hmm. They're getting fed. They're not freezing. They're not burning up. You know, they're not living in filth because they have no way to dispose of the waste and the trash and things like that. And they're getting the attention they need.
Yeah.
So it's a slow step-by-step process. But we want to take them from point A to point Z.
Yeah.
Instantly. And then go, I don't understand.
Yeah.
Why it's not working.
I think we also just want that instant gratification of like, I want to make an impact. I want to see that impact. I want it now. I want it now. I mean, that's so much of what America is anyways. Like, I want it now. Why can't you just be better now? I'm giving you this, just be better.
Yeah.
And it's just so insensitive and just not realistic. But like, what are ways other than giving to organizations like Home Street Home, people who are doing the things that you're saying are helpful and actually making an impact? What can like a mom in a car with 3 kids, 4 kids in the back, or a man going to work on a Tuesday, or like what are tangible ways that people are listening that can't get heavily involved in a Home Street Home right now? Mm-hmm. What are ways that just to like be kind, be helpful, and like what are ways to love them well that are easy? And some people may not want to hear, you know, I know that some people aren't as accepting to conversations or whatever, but just what are some ways that you think what would you tell people?
The most incredible thing, and I've been told this time and time and time again. I had some friends that were following me one day, and whenever I see somebody on a corner, if I can stop, when traffic allows me, I'll just stop, roll down the window. Now, sometimes I'm in my truck and I don't have anything. It's very rare, but sometimes I may have a bottle of water. But I just stop and say, hey, hello, how are you? Smile. You know, I know most of them, but the ones I don't know, I introduce myself.
Yeah.
You know, and I'll never forget this couple followed me for most of the day. And at the end of the day, I said, well, what do you think? And they were, of course, talking about the camps and this, that, and the other, and the impression they had. But then she looked at me. She said, but you know, Stephen, she said, the one thing I noticed more than anything else was when you just stopped and said hello, she said, the look on their face before you did that and the look on their face after you did that, you didn't do anything but say hello. Mm-hmm. She said it was incredible.
Yeah.
I said, you know why? Because somebody noticed them in a positive way. Mm-hmm. and somebody said hello to them. They weren't being invisible, or they weren't being looked at with disdain. And I tell people all the time, you don't have to have money to change a life.
Yeah.
You don't have to have a whole lot of time to change a life. It can literally be done in seconds with a smile and a hello. And always say, my name is so-and-so. You don't have to give them your last name, your social security number, and your address, folks. Come on, okay? Just give them your name. Because when you give them your name, when you say, hello, my name is Stephen, they know that it's genuine because you have given something of yourself and something you can give them that's cost nothing. A smile and an introduction. And that lets them know that they aren't invisible.
Yeah.
That they do still have some worth in some people's eyes.
Yeah.
And that's what it takes.
That's where it begins.
That's where it all starts. And until we as a society as a whole can look at it that way and handle it, and I go back to with the understanding is, yes, they may smile. You may have made their day right at that moment, but you're going to pull off, and 5 minutes later, they may sit there and go, I got to go get something to drink. And they may fall back right into their old ways. But what would happen if that happened 4 or 5 or 6 times a day, every day?
Which is so sad.
Yeah.
Because when I'm sitting in the car at a red light, there are at least in Nashville, there are at least 12 cars around me. You could get 12 smiles in a period of 2.5 minutes. And the fact that these people can go all day long without someone recognizing them and treating them like a human being and being kind and loving them well, even if it's just for 3 seconds right before the light turns green. Like, how easy is that?
It's simple. And when I was standing on my corner, I used to sit there and I'd see a car come pulling up. It'd be like a day like today. Maybe the windows would be down. Well, the next thing you know, you hear the windows going up. You hear the door locks being engaged. I've seen women take the purse out of the passenger seat because they were only one in the car and put it between their legs as they're sitting there.
Wow.
And I'm going, what about me says I'm a threat? What about me says I'm going to snatch your purse? What about me says you have to lock your doors? But that's unfortunately, that's the treatment the majority of the time that you get. And that's why I'm saying that simple hello, that simple smile, that simple humanizing.
Yeah.
When you introduce yourself and you make them feel like they're an equal to you.
Yeah.
It's what it takes.
It's healing.
How can people get practically involved with Home Street Home, and what are some of your guys' biggest needs as an organization right now?
Well, unfortunately, the answer to that question, especially now, is financial. And you and I discussed this the other day. We're in the worst financial shape than we've been in 5 years, 6 years. I'm struggling, to be honest with you. And I'm having to make decisions I don't like to have to make. But I understand it. And it's the economy. It's the world in which we live right now. I get it. And I wake up every day and go, I don't know how, but he does. So I'm going to depend on him, and I'm going to go do what I do. That's one way. And because our main thing is the essential survival supplies that we have to provide for them, it's not something that can easily be physically donated. Especially for people who will probably hear this podcast and go, I want to help, but I don't live in Nashville. Well, buying a tent over Amazon and shipping it to me is going to cost you a lot more. I could buy 2 tents with what you're going to pay for that. The material thing. Now, people that are local, we give out more non-perishable food than all the other organizations in Nashville combined. We're on track this year to hand out better than 10 tons. We did a little over 11 tons last year. The year of the pandemic, we handed out 21 tons of food because we were the only people out there feeding them. And as we all know, the cost of everything has gone up.
Yeah.
The camp stoves that we give them so they can heat their can of soup up. Last year, I was paying $14, $15 for them. They're now $25.
Wow.
My $8 sleeping bag is now costing me $15. It's what's happened.
Yeah.
It's what's going on. So that's how. But more than anything else, prayer. And if you're not Christian, that's great. Whatever. Change your thought process when it comes to our friends. Smile at them. Say hello to them. Mm-hmm. I say this all the time. Lauren's heard me say it over and over again. Folks, they're more afraid of you than you are of them. Mm-hmm. They are not dangerous. I get that all the time. Well, I would love to do something, but I'm a little bit afraid. And I go, what are you afraid of? Well, they're kind of dangerous, aren't they? And I go, let me tell you something. I'm 66 years old, so I'm old school. I would still read the Tennessean if it was no longer, if it was still what it was instead of now we call it the Tennessean. It's an 8-page newspaper, which is ridiculous. But I'm old school. So the first thing I do when I wake up is I watch the news. And we live in a city like everybody else does where crime has kind of gone crazy. Mm-hmm. And I hear about this person being killed, this place being robbed, this carjacking, this burglary. You know what I never hear? I never hear they're looking for a homeless person that did it.
Yeah.
You never hear that.
How can people that are local get involved with Home Street Home on a volunteer basis? Can you take in volunteers and take them down to the encampments? Somebody wants to be dedicated to
if
that
they
process?
want to be dedicated to that, and I'll tell people that, much like I told you going in, this isn't pretty, folks. Okay, and you need to. I love to take people into the field, but I'm upfront with them. It's not pretty. Okay, and the last thing I want to do to our friends is take somebody in there that's going to turn around and see what we saw the other day and go, "Oh my God," and maybe turn around and walk away. Yeah, I don't want to subject them to that. If you've got the heart and you understand, I would liken it to Uganda and a couple other places. People go, well, we go to missions in third world countries. Folks, I can take you to 15 third world countries right here in Nashville, Tennessee. Mm-hmm. The conditions are just as bad. Yeah. So if you're okay with that and you've got the heart, all you have to do is go to our website, homestreethometn.org, and there is a tab for volunteering. Click on that. There's a little form you can send us, and I'll respond to it within a few days. Or I'll put my phone number out there because half the world has it in Nashville.
I was about to say, everybody's got
it. It's 615-992-5762. You can call me anytime, day or night. I'm used to it. But yeah, and I also get asked, well, what about kids? Bring kids with you. Because I'll tell you, if you ever want to see them on their best behavior, have children. They love kids. You know why they love kids? Because they know they haven't made up their mind yet. Mm. Those kids look at them. What I hear all the time is, Mr. Steve, why don't they have a home? And you can see the sadness in their face. And they know that. And the kids are like, they'll run up to them. They'll smile and everything else. There's no judgment there.
Yeah.
And our friends know there's no judgment there.
Yeah.
So there's that way. If you would like to just donate financially, you can do so on the website. You can also donate through Venmo at Home Street Home. We also take material donations and be it clothing that is suitable for living outdoors 24/7, please.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Especially during the wintertime.
Yes. Yeah. Shoes, things like that. And we do have winter coming up. And I'm late to the game later than I normally am because of financial situations, because normally I start preparing for winter in like July, because winter is when we first met.
Yeah.
When Lauren and I in April first met, it was right there at the cusp of really turning into bad weather. It is the worst time of year, one of the deadliest times of year, and that's another thing that gets well overlooked. We've already lost over 100 of our friends on the streets this year. We've lost well over 100 every year for the last 5 years. The last 3 years in a row, we've set records just about.
Wow.
So, and that's the worst time of the year. So those are things that, we are looking forward to. But if they go to the website, again, they can look, and there's a tab they can push, and it'll show what we need.
Perfect. So if you're here in Nashville, Tennessee, you can visit homestreethome.org.
You can visit that from wherever you're at.
Yeah. If you want to get involved on a local level. Thank you both for being on the podcast. Thank you so much for sharing what you do, the work you're doing. Thank you so much for joining us and all the work you're doing here in Nashville as well, and supporting his ministry. And I always finish with this last question, and I'll ask you first, why local? Why do you feel like it's important to contribute locally?
I think that's the way we were designed. We were designed for community. And you are where you are for a reason, whether you see it that way or not. And the people around you, your community, I believe that's who you're responsible for and to. And like I said earlier, if you're not going to take care of your community, who else will? And I just think if everybody had that mindset of like, I'm going to look out for the people around me and see how I can make a positive difference for the people around me. If everybody did that, then all of a sudden everywhere would be cared for. And I mean, what a world that would be. So thank you so much for having me, Stephen. Thank you.
Oh.
I love you both so much. I'm so proud to know y'all.
Stephen, why local?
Well, y'all brought it up yesterday. All 4 of you that went out, not yesterday, day before, that went out in the field with me. At the end of the day, I asked you, what do you think? And all 4 of you came up with the same answer, whether you realized it or not. Okay. All 4 of you discussed and brought up the sense of community that our homeless friends have about their world. That was what all of you brought up. It was just so amazing that they had this sense of community and companionship, and, they take care of each other and things like that. So you want a good example of why local? Come with me and go to a few homeless camps, and you'll find out why local. Because we are each other's brother and sister, regardless of what we believe, regardless of where we're from.
Yeah.
And we're put together for a reason. I truly believe, even though I was a West Coast boy, I ended up in Nashville for a reason.
Yeah.
West Coast people that have shown up in Nashville now, we're having to teach them how to talk. They're here for a reason. We're in Nashville, or wherever your home is, wherever you're listening, where you're at, you're there for a reason.
Yeah.
It's not circumstance. It's not by happenstance. It's not an accident. You're exactly where you're supposed to be at this time. And part of that is taking care of each other.
Preach.